Okay, so I started reading Vygotsky, who I mentioned before, a very famous Soviet psychologist who did make quite a few breakthroughs that were later used and are still used in a lot of more modern psychology. Unfortunately, I don't have much time to read him because I have a lot of other books that I have to be reading because we're reading them with comrades, I'm reading them with my students, etc. But I'm just so inspired by what I'm reading from Vygotsky. I will put a little article in Russian about him. I'm sure there are a ton of English articles about him as well, but this one in particular does give you a bit of an analysis of this book. I definitely want to read this book myself, and I am in the process of reading it, but if you don't have the time, I think that this article is kind of giving it justice. Of course, I haven't finished reading the book, so I don't know. From what I've read so far, I think this article is pretty true to Vygotsky and what he was doing, especially in his analysis of art. And I'm just feeling so validated by a lot of what Vygotsky is saying, because all my life I've been thinking about art and what it means to be an artist, because I'm a very artistic person. If you haven't noticed yet, I am. I write and I dabbled in all kinds of different art forms and never felt comfortable calling myself an artist, just because I've had this convoluted relationship with art. And I've always thought about the connection of the form and the content. And I've always been a firm believer that content, or meaning rather, is what should be guiding the form. So I thought that if something is beautiful and it is done beautifully as a piece of art, however, it lacks in content, meaning it's kind of meaningless, I thought it was ultimately bad art. And Vygotsky actually argues that art form and the content of art are absolutely connected, and one cannot exist without the other. So I am now feeling validated to say that there is objectively bad art. And I think that Vygotsky and I agree on the fact that if you have something of importance to say, or if you have something that is a universal human experience, even if you want to express it in an original form, it is still going to be legible. It is still going to be understood by other people. And this is why I've never been a big fan of abstract art. And of course, if you're watching, you probably know that the CIA were actually behind a lot of the popularity of the abstract art in the States and in the West in general. There is a great Madeline Pendleton's podcast on it, on how the CIA promoted the abstract art so that people could see how free the people in the States were to express themselves, even if they just want to throw paint on a canvas that was still acceptable and fine. And look at the terrible, horrible, totalitarian USSR, where they don't allow free expression for artists, which I found very much ludicrous. Even before I learned that the CIA stood behind it all, I was like, well, if you don't have much to say, then don't say it, right? And if you're an artist, if you want to express yourself, you want to communicate something to your audience, then it has to be done in a form that will be understood. Even if a person has to sit with your piece of art, even if they have to think about it, discuss it, that is fine. It's actually good, I would argue, if people start having a conversation about your piece of art. But if your art is only legible to you and you only, then it's not art. Because I believe firmly that art is a form of communication among humans. It is a social process. Even though Vygotsky kind of wants to separate the art from the process, I'm not exactly sure about that yet, so I'm not going to speak on it too much. But I believe that if you want to tell something to your fellow man, you have to try and make it somewhat decipherable. And of course, it's going to depend. You know, time passes and we may not be able to understand some of the forms of art from the past. Some of it may not even survive. But then in the modern world, if we express ourselves through art, our goals should be to cover a wider audience, I believe. Yes, of course, there are some times and places where you can express something for just a select few people who may understand your lingo, be it written or in any other forms. I think that it's fine to have an art that is very specifically targeted at a specific audience, but I think what makes art great is when it is perceivable and capable of being enjoyed by a larger group of people. This is proletarian art, right? The kind of art that speaks to your average man, average person, and I don't think it's going to make art banal. I don't believe that originality lies in controversy or in the ability to surprise your audience. I think that in the modern day, so many artists just want to be not like everyone else, that they defeat the purpose of their art. They just become unintelligible, and they just do things just for the sake of the shock value or any other kind of value that brings them attention, which of course I understand. In the capitalist world you have to survive, but generally good art is going to be well received, at least by some people. But we also have to remember that not every good artist is going to be able to be known by people just because of the nature of the world. In the past it was the same. How many great, amazing artists do you think we've never learned about just because they were too poor or too far away from all the urban centers or all the art centers, and nobody ever learned about them? But at least they got to express this love for the world and for the art form that they chose, and they could share with someone. So I would argue, if you make art that is enjoyed by at least someone, that is art worth having and worth creating. And I think that the modern capitalist notions of, pushing for more, always seeking out this expansion, is definitely influencing the artists, because we're all ideological subjects, whether we admit to it or not. So I really want to encourage people to not do art for art's sake. I think I made a video about this where I also talked about that art is a form of communication, and I've just reiterated it in this video as well. And I do think that there is value in creating art, even if there isn't going to be like a large audience that is going to enjoy it. You need to understand as an artist and accept that maybe you will die nameless, but at least you had this experience and you had this ability to share with other people, which I think ultimately goes down to the purposes of art. Art is there as one more facet of our humanity. There are many of us who feel so deeply. We just feel the world. We see it in bright colors. We see it as this psychedelic hallucination, and we want to share that with others, not because of anything. We just like to share. Just as I mentioned before, time and time again, I believe that people just enjoy sharing. Kropotkin believed that. Mike Tomasello believes that nowadays. And there are a lot of people who see that in their day-to-day life. It's fun to share. It's pleasant to share. So why not share? Even if nothing comes of it. If you never become rich or famous because of your art, so who cares? At least you made something that felt good to you and maybe to a few people. But going back to Vygotsky and some more of his revolutionary ideas on art, he also argued that the art of an individual social man is necessarily going to express the bigger social man. And I think he distinguished between the social man that Ilyenkov later kind of talked more about, and I don't even know how to translate that properly. I'm saying social man, but Vygotsky and Ilyenkov, they used общественный человек, which общество is society. So I am translating this as a social man. If you have a better translation, or if you know how it was translated into English, please let me know. I'm gonna just call him a social man for now, and then maybe if I learn another term I will use it. But I think Vygotsky expressed that this social man, this embodiment of the entire humanity that changes throughout the years, throughout the different modes of production, of course, and it is a big ideological subject, I think, in Althusserian terms. It is necessarily going to be expressed through all of the individual men, and thus the art is going to be accessible, right? It means that art is going to be universally understood by all people who are part of this society, which I think I'm also arguing here in this video, that I think that if you are not able to express a certain thought or a certain universal truth or a certain thesis, if you will, to an audience, that may be because you may be lacking in craftsmanship, you may be lacking in skills, and this is remedied by practice. Usually, if you're able to practice more, you will be able to express yourself better. It is not bad to not be able to express yourself fully and beautifully and wonderfully right away. There are very, very few people who are able to do that right away. These are the rare geniuses, and arguably they would usually still receive some kind of training and practice. But another cause that I'm more interested in is if you're unable to express certain things to your audience, which you are trying to express, it may be that you are not fully developed in this thought, like you are not yet sure what it is you're thinking about. You do not have a thesis yet. You're just thinking about the thesis. You're just trying to make sense of a certain phenomena or a certain thing. And that is fine as well. This is your process. This is your creative process. And you may be able to arrive at a certain complete thought or a complete complete thesis later. However, many times what I observe in modern media, at least in the media landscape, is that people have these half-cooked ideas that have potential, and they just throw these things at an audience, and they're like, this is a finished product, you consume it, you feel something, you tell us it's good. And I don't feel this way. I really loathe modern cinema, modern movies, more often than not, because they're not really telling me anything. They're not really showing me much. Sometimes the form may be kind of beautiful or kind of hinting at something, but ultimately the contents are void of meaning. They're very much lacking. I'm looking at you, art house or pretentious wannabe art house movies where you show a lot of exotic, weird things, and you never tell me anything. And I feel cheated. When I watch these kind of movies, I'm like, I just wasted my time. This is not telling me anything. And I want to have a conversation with an artist. I don't have to agree with the artist. I don't have to love what it is he has to say, but I have to be able to decipher it somehow. If you are telling me something unintelligible, then, or if you're giving me a half-cooked idea, then we're not having a conversation. You're just throwing things at me. You're throwing ideas, you're throwing words, you're throwing images at me, and I don't enjoy that. I don't think there's much value in doing that, and I know that it may sound like I'm one of the olds, and I am. And I think Vygotsky and I are kind of on the same team. Of course, I'm going to keep reading this book, and once I finish it, oh boy, I'm gonna make all the videos about this book, because so far I've been enjoying it greatly. And of course, the other reasons why a piece of art may not be very much legible to an audience is because of capitalism, because capital doesn't care about anything but profit, and they are going to exploit all types of forms so that they can reap their profits. They will create copies of copies of copies. They will create remakes of sequels, of prequels, and that's it. There is nothing else to it. There is no artistic value in so much that is created nowadays. And of course, I've ranted about this before. And one more thing, I think I shared before my warm affection towards Bradbury's work, Fahrenheit, whatever number. And in there, he has this depiction of TV shows that are completely meaningless, where people just argue for argument's sake. They just scream at each other, something unintelligible. And there's no plot, there's nothing happening, actually. When Montag, the protagonist of the story, asks Mildred, his wife, what is this about? What is happening? She's unable to tell him, but she can show him, because there is this wave of sound, there is this wave of light that actually just affects the neurotransmission, basically, right? It creates a sense of something having happened, and Mildred then is like, see? This is it. This is it. Did you feel it? And Montag is like, I felt it, but it was about nothing. So this is what I feel a lot of modern capitalist art is like. It is just there to imitate the real deal. It is just there to give you a breath, a hint of an emotion, of something. It may mechanically try and get a reaction out of you, but it's void of humanity. It is void of true expression. It is void of passion. It is void of life, and I hate it, and you cannot convince me otherwise. Of course, still there are brilliant pieces of art that are created by independent artists all throughout the world, and every time I find a little gem, I do hold it close to me, and I enjoy it and I cherish it, but it hasn't been happening very often lately, which is unfortunate. But yeah, I do really want to talk more about art, especially literature, because literature is my preferred drug of choice. And you let me know what forms of art you enjoy and what you think about true art and what it should be like, and tell me if you agree with Vygotsky or what other thoughts you may have. And I hope you have a great day. Consider supporting me on Patreon. Do take care of yourself and your community first, and I'll talk to you sometime later.